So I thought for this session we could give an opportunity for people to ask questions. If anybody has any questions, this will be a good time. Yes, one question.
Thank you. Today morning, I happened to go through one part of Ajahn Sumedho's book, Four Noble Truths. Now, the way the thing is mentioned about dukkha, it doesn't occur to me like that, like it occurred, or it is in the book, that it is something, like misery or real suffering. But when I look at the other part, there was a small mention that it's a forever changing wish for something. That is something I can relate to. So my question is, which of these should I kind of keep in existence to properly relate to and get to the...
Yeah. So, question about dukkha. It's actually quite a broad topic, and there are many different ways that it's spoken about. In the English language, we generally use the word suffering, which, as you know, is actually usually refers to something quite strong. Suffering, if you think somebody's suffering, you think, well, they're being tortured, or there's, major illness or big bereavement, or they've lost all their money, something quite extreme. And certainly that would be dukkha. But it also has a much more subtle meaning. And there are ways it's talked about. One way that it's spoken about is that just the very fact that things change makes them unsatisfactory. So if it's something, even pleasant things can be dukkha, because if we don't relate to them in the right way, because they change. And if we like something and we want to hold on to it, then even if we're enjoying it at the time, knowing that it's going to change gives it a kind of a painful shadow there. So even the best things in life, if we don't relate to them in the right way, can be a source of struggle, because there's a subtle kind of holding on, wanting it to last, if we attach to pleasant feeling. And then there's an even more refined way. So really anything, any kind of subtle unsettledness in the mind, that's what it refers to. So, just the subtlest kind of doubt or uncertainty about something, the subtlest irritation about something, is a kind of is dukkha, has this quality to it, and until we can actually experience a cessation, and for most of us, it's just a momentary cessation when we stop attaching to anything. And obviously, for the fully enlightened human being who no longer attaches to anything, there is no dukkha. But for most of us, there is a certain amount of struggle of one kind or another. I remember Ajahn Chah one time when I first met him in London, he talked about natural suffering and unnatural suffering. And he said that the natural suffering is the suffering of being born, the suffering of old age, the suffering of sickness, suffering of death. These is like a bodily form of dukkha, because it's just continuously changing. And if we identify with it, then, of course, there's going to be a kind of a fear and a struggle. But then he talked about the unnatural suffering, which is what we add to the ordinary pain of existence. Actually, no, that's to do with the identification. If we don't identify with it, then it's simply unstable. It's just not a stable, reliable refuge. But the unnatural suffering is what we add to it, the not wanting it, the fear, the feeling that something has gone wrong. So, certainly having a human body which feels things. If you cut yourself, if you burn yourself, if you knock yourself, then it hurts. There's pain, which is another kind of dukkha, physical pain. But that doesn't have to be the unnatural, the added-on suffering connected with that. The feeling of anger because somebody hit you, the feeling of foolishness because you tripped over something, the feeling that it shouldn't be like this. Why me? If you get a sickness, well, why does it happen to me? Feeling of resentment or confusion or anger about that. So when we're wise, and all of us have the capacity to be wise, then when we experience physical pain, or just even cold or hunger, physical discomfort, if we're wise, we can just recognize this is just the bodily suffering that has arisen dependent on having a body. If I didn't have a body, I wouldn't experience this. In fact, they say that the human birth is by far the best birth, much better than to be born as a deva, because the devatas, they don't have bodies. They just have very bright, delightful minds, but they don't have nearly enough suffering to be an incentive to liberate themselves. But for a human being, we experience plenty of physical suffering, and if we're clever, then we transform it, and we use it on our journey to liberation. So we're going to experience physical pain, cold, hunger, aches and pains of all kinds, changing faculties as we get older. This is what we can all expect, and the eventual death of the body and the bodies of those dear to us. But whether we suffer or not is a matter of how wise we are, how wisely we can relate to it. So it's helpful, like sometimes we can feel very, very peaceful and calm, say in our meditation, if, at some stage the mind settles and we feel very calm and happy. There can even with that be a subtle kind of suffering, a sort of subtle kind of wanting it to last. And then, of course, we can get into trying to recreate the condition that brought about that lovely peaceful state. We want more of it. And that's when we begin to see that even with a pleasant state, there's also a kind of suffering there. So these are some reflections on the topic of dukkha. It is quite broad, and in each case it needs to be understood in order to be let go of, to be relinquished, or to relinquish the causes of it.
Yeah. When Buddha said that there is suffering, and then he experienced wisdom, delight, joy, and lightness.
Yes.
It seems like there was something more to the understanding, that just understanding the suffering, and he was like,
he felt happy.
Yeah.
He felt pleased to have. Yes, in that you're talking about referring to the Dhammacakka Sutta, where yes, bhikkhus, there is suffering, and with that I experience delight and joy. Yes. I felt very happy when I heard the Buddha's teaching on suffering. It was as though there was a sense of pleasure at just being able to name it, rather than being just sort of caught in a kind of confusing mass of suffering and struggle and trying to deal with it without understanding. So it may be that when the Buddha was able to recognize this fact of existence, there was a sense of, he was pleased, he was glad. Of course, we have to remember that this was a teaching that was given after his enlightenment. So he came to his understanding, and then he formulated the teaching based on what he'd realized. And and as he gave the teachings with each section, there was the pleasure and delight. This is the way it's been handed down to us, and this is one way that we could understand it. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, at the back there.
Ajahn, in the morning, you mentioned that so far we've been programmed, our mind has been programmed for achieving something or another in life. Here we are sitting, we also want to achieve liberation ultimately.
We want to achieve?
Liberation.
Liberation, yes. Yes, we do.
So, in our pursuit of that aim, how often it is wise, whether it is wise to contemplate more often on the aspect of ultimate liberation? How often we should contemplate?
Yes. Yeah.
Our ultimate aim is liberation. So I think once we contemplate on that, our focus becomes more sharp. This is what I felt. So my question is, how often we can contemplate on that part? Our ultimate aim is nibbana, liberate from all suffering.
You know, I think it varies from person to person. And I think for some people, obviously for you, you find it helpful to contemplate that quite frequently. I don't know that it's quite the same for everybody. I mean, I remember when I first came across this teaching, I was extremely inspired and encouraged at the possibility. Sorry, can you? Is it all right? Yeah. At the possibility of perfect liberation. That was very exciting, a very joyful experience for me. But I was also very much aware of how much kind of rubbish there was between where I was at that time and perfect liberation. And so for me, what I found helpful was rather to have that as a kind of, like a guiding light. But in my everyday practice and focus, my practice and focus was much more about the immediate suffering, dealing with the suffering in the moment, the struggle that was going on right here, right now. So I think both are useful, to contemplate suffering in the moment, not to ignore that, but also, and then the ultimate goal of perfect liberation, that this is possible for me. So that, as I said, I think they're both important, and I think it varies from person to person how much emphasis they put on one and how much on the other. I did actually have a little theory that actually it was the men who tended to kind of like to look at the ultimate goal. You know, always the monks and the men who were talking about perfect liberation, whereas the women were much more down to earth and the suffering of this moment. So this was a kind of a little theory I evolved, a private theory. I didn't talk about it before. But it'd be interesting afterwards to hear whether I'm correct or not. But either way, they're both important. They're both important. I remember looking at Ajahn Sumedho on the first retreat. I sat with him, and you know, he was so wonderful, and he was giving these wonderful teachings, and I just looked at him. I thought, but I could never do that. I could never ever do that. And then one day he asked each of the monks who were sitting beside him. He had 3 more junior monks, and each of them gave a talk, and they weren't quite so impressive. I mean, they were impressive, and then I started to think, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So sometimes if our goal is too lofty, too high, we can be discouraged. So we need both. We need people to sort of walk along beside us and encourage us, and we need somebody up ahead saying, come on, you can do it. Both are helpful.
I have one more question.
Okay.
I read that you had a lot of experience in dealing with people with mental sickness before you became a monk. And for those who are suffering from mental sickness, psychiatrists normally don't encourage them to do meditation. So what are your views on those kind of patients? To what extent they can do the meditation of the kind we are doing?
It depends very much on the nature of the sickness. There are different kinds of mental illness, and for some it could exacerbate the condition, make it worse. For others, it can support a sense of calming. It was interesting, before I began to work in psychiatric hospitals, I really had the idea that if people were just treated in a good way and had a happy family background, and if they were in surroundings with people who could look after them in the right way, that they would get better. And then it was very useful for me to spend time working in psychiatry, and just to see that actually there are certain conditions of mind that actually need other help, other support. And I long for the day when they find a perfect cure for all kinds of mental illness. And sometimes in my practice, and when I meet people, the best I can do is to support the relatives. Because when somebody is mentally very unbalanced and out of touch with reality, it can be very disturbing for those around them. And the disturbance, the upset, the anxiety among those around them actually doesn't help the person who's ill. So sometimes the best we can do is actually encourage, parents, husband, wife, whatever, relatives, to practice meditation, to find ways of responding to the sickness of their loved one in the most skillful way, in a way that's going to support them in just calming and settling to some degree. It's a very difficult condition to work with, and there are certainly cases, and there's been quite a lot of research done nowadays into mindfulness, sort of simple basic mindfulness training, and they have actually found that for many, many, many cases of, say, depression, that people respond at least as well through meditation, mindfulness meditation, as through taking medication. So that's very encouraging, that there is an alternative for some of the different kinds of sickness that human beings are subject to. So it's like a beginning, little steps. We had one lady who lived in our community for a number of years, who was an elderly lady, and she had enormous amounts of barami because somehow or other she landed up living with us. And she was actually very sick mentally, but she learned how to mask it. And if she went through a phase of being a little bit more disturbed than normal, she used to come and bang on our doors at night, and she'd come and she'd knock on the door and say, "You must find Ajahn Sumedho at once. I need to talk to him now." And she would go and she'd shine a torch in your face at 2:00 in the morning with these urgent messages. And I remember one time we were actually thinking about, prescribing some kind of drug that would help her to be a little bit more settled. And when she realized that this was happening, she wrote a letter to her doctor and said, "I don't need that drug." And she actually found ways to mask, to behave in a way that enabled her to be more accepted in the community. So she stayed, and she died in our community, and at the age of 91, I think she was. So for certain fortunate people, there are ways that they can be supported very directly. But other times, maybe we can support the relatives, help them at least, if it's not suitable for the person themselves to do like a lot of focused concentration practices. And one of the things sometimes that happens in our community, like especially during retreat time, don't worry, it won't happen here because we're not doing that kind of focused, not so intensive practice, but sometimes you have people and they just want to meditate all the time, and they stop eating and they stop sleeping, and before you know it, they've just gone sky high and completely out of control. So for certain people, if that happens, then I always encourage them to do something very practical and to not do so much focused concentration practices, but to really ground themselves. So we would often, if somebody gets into that kind of state, we would send them out into the garden to dig, lots of digging, or else to go to the kitchen and just work with chopping vegetables, do very basic, simple, practical things. But sometimes we need to ask them, suggest that they leave and go and be with their family, and so the family can support them if it's too disturbing for those around them. So, very important question, a big question in our society, and especially nowadays with people having so much pressure in their lives, and also contemplating ways that we can support ourselves in insanity, so that we ourselves are able to manage the stresses and the pressures of our lives. So often on a retreat, I'll take quite some time to encourage people to just simplify their lives, to look at how they spend their time, and do they really need to do so much work? Do they really need to have so many different activities that they're engaged in? Can they actually cut down on those and just spend more time quietly, more time with nature if they can, more time enjoying the company of their family, friends and relations, so that they're not constantly under pressure to get a better job, get more money, more things to look after, more obligations. Because we can get caught in a kind of rat race, going round and round in circles. And there's a lot of pressure in our society to do that. Media constantly encouraging us to get more and better, and that we have to have this kind of clothing and this kind of cosmetic. I mean, I get really surprised, shocked when I realize, how much people spend on cosmetics. It's far beyond just a bar of soap to keep you clean, all kinds of other things to make your skin just right, your hair just right, your face just right, everything just right. And I suppose people make a lot of money out of it. But all of that needs money, and all of that needs work, and then you have to pay the rent for your house, you have to pay for electricity and food, and it's endless. So in our monastic life, we're encouraged to really keep it very, very simple. So 4 requisites. We need to wear something, it can be anything, something to cover the body. We need to eat some food. Need some kind of shelter to protect us from the sun or the cold, some kind of medicine. And I find it helpful just having that as a very, very simple, basic baseline. And then anything else is a little bit extra that we can actually consider, do I really need this? Is this really important? And obviously, as a layperson, you need more than just one set of robes. People would, if you're kind of attending different kinds of occasions or going to work or doing, working outside or holiday or whatever, it can be helpful to have more than one thing that you wear. Although I think for many people, just having one thing that they wear, they're glad of that, and that's enough. One can be content with that. Anyway, I've strayed a little bit from the main topic, but I think it's all a little bit related. Having begun talking about whether mental illness means that one shouldn't meditate, to seeing how we ourselves can support ourselves in insanity. Support ourselves in sanity, not insanity. Not. We're all a little bit insane. In fact, Ajahn, I think it was said that the monastery is a little bit like a mental hospital. And I think as our practice evolves as we do more practice and meditate and come to understand and to appreciate the way that the mind works, the way that it creates things. We begin to see, well, yes, I am a little bit crazy here. The things that we get upset about or angry about or confused about. And so it's really wonderful. We have this Buddha medicine, perfect psychiatric medicine from the Buddha. Yes, another question. Raj.
While meditating, many a times one feels like sleepy and something like that happens. And it happens quite in spite of not wanting to be like that. And so one gets disturbed by it. I mean, this is not the right thing to do, right thing to happen. So what do you suggest should be the remedy for it?
Well, yes, this is a very, very important topic, and it's one that I've struggled with quite severely. I had a lot of sleepiness in my years as a nun, and I think one of the most important things is to not worry about it too much. It's something that we need to be concerned about, but if we can make ourselves really miserable, really discouraged, and we can get into a real struggle, and we can even end up hating meditation. I've actually allowed myself sometimes to say, I hate meditation, because there's always a sense of failure. Every time I sit down, I fall asleep. And you just think, oh dear, this is awful. And you try so hard, and you try all these different strategies, and people say, why don't you try this? I've tried everything, I tell you. And none of them seem to work. The one thing, well, there's two things actually I can recommend. In fact, it's quite interesting because the Buddha has a series of things that you can try. I don't know if you've come across his advice for dealing with sleepiness. And I can't remember the exact order of things, but things like, well, pulling your earlobes, that's a good one, because there are actually pressure points there that can bring a sense of energy into the body. Washing your face with cold water. Another one that is recommended, I can't actually do it, is like when you're meditating, is just to bring to mind an image of light, bright light, as you're sitting. But a kind of equivalent one that can work is just opening the eyes. And when you're feeling very sleepy, what's interesting about this, I mean, I've been told so many times to open the eyes, and I sit there in meditation and I think, I can't. I just can't. And it's almost as though your eyelids were just so heavy, you just can't lift them up. And that's often because there's a bit of resistance there. You just don't want to, basically. But I really would encourage you to, if you are feeling sleepy, I really encourage you to open your eyes. Open your eyes and stare at something bright. So, look at the sky behind us. In the evening time, look at the candles. Just fix your gaze on the candle. That can be helpful. Just look at something bright. Because if you close your eyes, you'll fall asleep. Almost guaranteed. So that's the kind of equivalent to bringing to mind a light. If you can't do that, which, I mean, I think, if you're skilled in meditation, you can, like the kasina practices where you imagine bright light. And if you can do that, great. But if you can't do that, open your eyes wide would be one thing. The final last resort that the Buddha recommended was to meditate on the edge of a cliff. And we've got lots of cliffs at Milntume, where I live in Scotland. We have a really steep ravine, and there are plenty of places I could sit, but I've never dared. Because I think I might just fall asleep, even though I'm sitting here on the edge of a cliff. But the equivalent for that which I would also recommend and encourage during this time of retreat, and we'll do some anyway, is to stand. So if when we're sitting, when everybody's sitting, if you find that you're really sleepy and you can't keep your eyes open, the other thing you can do is stand up. Because you're a little bit less likely to fall asleep standing up. It actually brings quite a lot of energy into the system. So when I teach a retreat, rather than saying you've got to sit absolutely still, don't stand up, I say, please, if you're feeling sleepy, stand up. Even just for a few minutes. Try and do it gently so you're not disturbing people around you. But standing up for a few minutes is a very good antidote. But for all of these, particularly keeping the eyes open and standing up, you have to be willing to do it. And one of the things I think about sleepiness is that it's a kind of psychological way of not waking up. I mean, metaphorically as well as literally. It's like a strategy of Mara. Mara. It's almost as though Mara comes to sit on your head and push your eyelids down so you just fall asleep. So you don't actually become enlightened. You don't see clearly. You don't understand Mara and his strategies. So we have to be rather clever to outwit Mara. So Mara can try that, try making us fall asleep, or Mara can try making us just give up. I'm a hopeless case, I'll never be any good, because I just keep falling asleep. Mara can try that. It hasn't worked with me, I just kept going, even though I did keep falling asleep. But, what I realized in my case was that sometimes, well, there were two things that were happening. One was that I was just very tired, because I had the idea that, if you were progressing in your meditation, then you wouldn't sleep very much. People were saying, yes, 6 hours sleep, 5 hours sleep, 4 hours sleep. So I would try that. And, of course, I would be exhausted, completely exhausted. So it was natural that the body would want to sleep. And then, as I said, the other thing is this subtle kind of negativity. Because when you come on retreat or in monastic life, a lot of the kind of entertainments, a lot of the things that you're used to doing, ways of expressing yourself, are no longer allowed. So as a nun, I can't wear bright colours. I can't sort of do funny things with my hair. I mean, I've done a very funny thing with my hair, but I can't. There's a very significant limit on the ways that I can express myself, that the ego can manifest. And so if I can't express myself outwardly, then you just fall asleep. So the Buddha likened it to like being put in a little prison cell with no light, no air, no real sense of any kind of purpose in your life, just stuck in this little cell. And that's what it feels like, isn't it? So it's a very interesting phenomenon. And one of the things that led me into sleepiness was that I actually liked being peaceful. And so in meditation, there's a kind of alert, bright kind of peacefulness that can happen. But there's also a very dull kind of sleepiness that can peacefulness that can happen. And that's the one we want to be careful about. So if the mind gets a little bit drifty, a little bit dreamy, ever so peaceful, so calm, so wonderful, and then you're asleep. So watch out for those pleasant, drifty, dreamy states. And if you see that happening, even though it's the last thing you want to do, open your eyes. And if your eyes won't open, then stand up. That's what I would recommend. But I know how difficult it is, because I've been through it lots of times. So time for one more question. Over here, okay.
Ajahn, in respect of meditation, how should a deluded mind work?
How should a deluded mind work? How do you mean?
I mean, what preventions or precautions that you take, to come out of delusion?
Okay, so really, like, how do you know that you're deluded? Kind of.
A confused personality?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, well, the Buddha was very clever and very compassionate, and he found ways to teach us. Even, well, for all of us, we're all deluded, and even and the fact that you've come here to practice meditation is an indication that you're not totally deluded, just a little bit, averagely deluded. So a little bit of delusion. So we've all come, expression that's sometimes used with a little bit of dust in our eyes. So there's something that's brought us, a kind of recognition that this can be helpful, that the Buddha's teachings do make sense, and that we have work to do. And that's normal. So the Buddha gave what we call the foundations of mindfulness. You might have come across that teaching. And the way I understand it is just basic reference points. So what we were doing this morning, focusing on the breath, and with the walking meditation, focusing on the body, walking back and forth. We can see that the body is something that is definitely here right now. We can experience the body. We know that there's a body here. You know that you've got a body there. There's a body. Don't know very much about it, but we know that it's here. It's something fairly solid. We can touch it. We can feel it. We can experience the world through the senses. So that's actually not deluded. The body is definitely here. So we can be aware of the body breathing. We can be aware of the body walking. These are also things that there's no delusion here. We're actually experiencing this directly. As we're doing this, there may well be thoughts coming into the mind. And you may find yourself remembering something nice that happened, something horrible that happened. You may find yourself thinking about that thing that happened. You may find yourself planning for the future, what you're going to do about it. All kinds of ideas might come into your mind. Maybe it was about you in relation to somebody else. These are all things that we need to understand. These are all not absolutely verifiable truth. They're memories or they're plans. They're not about something that's happening here and now. What we can know for certain is that there is thinking happening. So you can know that. That's not deluded. There's definitely thinking happening here. And you can even examine the thinking. But the actual content of the thought is not really happening right now, is it? Like when I was talking about how when I'm in the UK, I imagine I'm in India, and now that I'm here, I imagine I'm in Scotland. So that's not reality. That's just an image in the mind. So partly working with the deluded mind is actually observing it, noticing how it works, and noticing how it causes us suffering. So in my practice, I use suffering a lot as, not that I like to suffer or I want to suffer, but when there is suffering there, I investigate it, because that's the way I learn about the ways that I make life difficult for myself. And little by little, you learn how to take it apart and to examine it more closely and to see, that's just the mind. This is just mind created. I don't have to believe in this. So you're doing definitely the right thing in working with the deluded mind. And don't think of your mind as deluded. Occasionally a delusion arises, but you're a disciple of the Buddha, you're on the path to liberation, and getting clearer and clearer moment by moment through your investigation. So find ways to encourage yourself. That's also very important. So I hope that's helpful. I think I've said a lot of things, and if there are no more pressing questions, I'd like to suggest we have a little break, 10 minutes or so, go and breathe some fresh air, walk around, have a bit of a stretch, and then we'll come back and we'll have another sitting.